Well, in fact, they do, broadly speaking. Some nuanced differences, but generally speaking, they actually all really agree on the same policy. And that's pretty similar to what CCL's proposed solution is, Citizens Climate Lobby and Citizens Climate Education. So we like to call this carbon fee and dividend. Exxon would call it a revenue neutral carbon tax or revenue neutral carbon fee. Perhaps you've heard those terms before. This is similar to that in a lot of ways. So let's walk through it. It's kind of a three-step, a three-pronged policy stool, three-leg stool. The first is to put a fee on fossil fuels. Very simply, that kind of gets back to that idea of the sin tax, right? Put a tax on it. That's basically a carbon tax, right? We've all heard that term before. Now, a carbon tax has some attractive features and some unattractive features. Let's address the unattractive features first, and we'll get to how we fix them later. The unattractive features of a carbon tax are mostly twofold. One is that any new tax, any new revenue to the government is not very popular politically. Certainly, I think our senators in this state have probably both signed on to no tax pledges. They won't raise any new revenue. So that's one reason it's unattractive. The second reason carbon tax is, at least politically, second reason carbon tax is unattractive is because it actually is very regressive. So it leaves low and middle income households behind. Right? If you're living paycheck to paycheck and now all of a sudden your cost of living goes up, you don't have a heck of a lot of disposable income to cover those costs. So one of the big concerns about a carbon tax is what does it do to the economy? What does it do to the folks who need that money the most? We're going to address those two concerns in a minute. But now let's talk about why we do like the carbon tax approach. Quite frankly, it's simple, it's predictable, it's transparent, and it really provides business a very clear roadmap by which to develop into a low-carbon economy. So basically the idea here is we put a fee on fossil fuels, you start it small, and you escalate it predictably and transparently over time. So whether I'm Mercedes-Benz right down the road making automobiles, whether I'm Airbus down in Mobile making airplanes, whether I'm this church looking at an installation project for the building, or whether I'm Walmart or anybody else, I can look at this carbon tax and say, here it is today, here's what it's going to be in 10 years from now. I have perfect price predictability, so that if I want to invest in energy efficiency or solar or nuclear or whatever, I know exactly what my cost of return is going to be. That's really important, because if you can get the business world certainty on the cost of emissions, then we're going to unlock an immense amount of capital that's going to go into cleaning up our emissions and help the economy reduce its carbon emissions pretty dramatically. So that's why we like a carbon tax. It's very predictable, transparent, it's really tough to cheat, very simple. So it's very attractive for those reasons. Okay, now let's talk about the few issues that we mentioned before. That it hurts low-income families, and that it raises new revenue for the government, which is not popular among some folks in Congress. So to answer that issue, we introduced the second leg of the policy, which is to make it revenue neutral. Now that's basically government speak for the government administers the program, but they don't get to keep the money. Instead, they take all this money, they put it in a trust fund, separate of the general budget, and every month they take all that money, they chop it up, and they send it back to all of you and me, and Bill Gates, and everybody else. Everybody gets an equal share of the carbon fund. So that does two things. That A, makes it revenue neutral, so the government's not keeping it, aside from the small administrative cost. And two, that makes sure that low and middle income households are not left out of pocket. In fact, we've studied this, and about 2/3 of households either break even or come out ahead. Reason being that the average carbon footprint for low-income folks is going to just tend to be less than the average because they have less to spend. So put a fee on fossil fuels, make it revenue neutral. And by the way, this idea might sound a little radical to sending a check back. It's really not. The state of Alaska kind of does this already. They have something called the Alaska Permanent Fund. So they take oil royalties and they send them back to households every year. Everybody gets a check. Very, very popular program, as you might expect. And of course the federal government does this already with Social Security and other benefits like that. So there is a lot of infrastructure to do this. The third aspect of this might not be quite as obvious, but it's what we call the border adjustment. So the border adjustment, the idea here is that, let's go back to the example of Mercedes or Hyundai or Honda, any of the car manufacturers in this state, or any manufacturer here, especially if you're in heavy industry. If your cost of energy is a big cost of the input of the good that you're producing and you're trying to sell it overseas, well, now you're at a competitive disadvantage. Now you're at a competitive disadvantage to your counterparts overseas, right? And we don't want to send jobs and emissions overseas. That defeats the point of the whole program. So what we have to do is at the border, we have to protect American industry and prevent, that leakage issue by applying a border adjustment. And the idea there is if you're importing from or exporting to a country without a similar policy, you apply either a tariff or a rebate as that good crosses the border. And that will do a few things. First of all, that will, again, protect the American manufacturer. That will also, perhaps more importantly, incentivize other countries to follow suit. Because if you're in India, which is one of the few countries left without a national carbon policy, then basically it's not going to take you too long to figure out if we want to avoid this tariff at the border, all we do is just apply a fee here at home, and then you don't have to deal with this tariff anymore. So really the big driver in doing this is not because we want to create this new accounting policy for imports and exports. It's really to send a price signal to the international community that we'd like them to jump on board with their own policy. Now that argument, admittedly, is becoming less and less relevant. The reason is that if you look at the top 10 largest economies in the world, there are only 3 that currently do not have a carbon pricing policy: Russia, the United States, and India. And so, in fact, China is now acting, they're ahead of us, not only on producing solar and those kinds of things, but also in implementing a carbon policy. They're implementing a national cap and trade system this year. So they could turn around to the U.S. and say, hey, if you want to import those goods here, we're going to put a tariff at the border because we're paying more for energy than you are. So we almost face that risk. Now, I don't know if that'll happen or not, but it certainly wouldn't be unprecedented if we did that. So again, in summary, it took me a little while to walk through it, but it's actually a pretty simple policy. Put a price on carbon, make it revenue neutral, do the border adjustment. Now, the good news in all this is that it's actually more politically popular and more known out there, certainly amongst policy folks, than perhaps might first meet the eye. Jim Hansen, pretty prominent climate scientist, he's on our advisory board. He tends to lean politically to the left. He's a big supporter of this. The reason that he really focuses on that revenue neutrality piece is because of the concern about low-income families, like we talked about before. Also on our advisory board is George Shultz, who worked for Ronald Reagan. He kind of helped us craft this policy. He talks about the importance of revenue neutrality so that we're not raising revenue for the government. So, our thought is, hey, we don't care why you like the policy. If you like it, great. That's what we're looking for, is support. And there are many others who support it on the political left and right as well. Additionally, I like to point out, now I'm from a big, petro state, oil and gas state. I guess you guys have a little more coal here than we do. But certainly within the industry, there are a lot of leaders, at least in the oil and gas industry, that have been talking about the merits of putting a price on carbon. Perhaps the most close, the companies that are closest to our position include Statoil, my former employer, Exxon, NG, which is a big gas company. I like to tell this story. Folks who have been traveling with me they've heard this whole spiel several times, so I give you guys a lot of credit for sticking through it again. But NG, I was at a big conference this year called Zero Week. It's a big energy conference in Houston, probably the biggest in the world. And all of these companies, power companies, with their southern companies there included. And there's kind of 2 takeaways that I took from that. The first was that just about every event, or every presentation, regardless of whether the topic was about climate change or not, the tone, the discussion was really very positive in terms of talking about solutions, how do we reduce emissions, how do we move forward on this. So the tenor, so to speak, of the conference was very positive. But the other thing I point to is a quote by one of the vice presidents at NG, French-based company, but he came and he said, if the question is, do we need a carbon tax, the answer is absolutely yes. He said, and the reason is this: I need certainty to plan my business. Right now we have a Congress and an administration, well, mostly a Congress, that can't seem to agree on where we need to go on this issue. And without that, it becomes very difficult. If I want to invest in biofuels or putting a new gas well into the ground or oil or whatever I want to invest in, whether it's clean energy, traditional fossil fuels, I don't have that price signal. I don't know what the government is going to come and put on me in 5 or 10 years. I need that price signal, and a carbon tax will give me that. So the good news is that industry, at least the bigger players, not everybody, but the bigger players are starting to get behind this as well, which, it's not to convince you one way or the other. I'm sure people have opinions on these companies, that's fine. but the importance of just communicating that, the serious players in this industry have already started to take position. That's an important thing to understand as you communicate this issue to friends and family. Okay, so we've been talking about this policy for a while with our legislators and our friends and family, and we often get the question, okay, well, what will it do, right? Whenever you hear the words carbon tax, what are the two knee-jerk words you hear after that? Job killer, right? Carbon tax, job killer. If you want to stop anything in Washington, D.C., you say the words job killer, it's dead on arrival. So with that mindset, we said, well, we want to understand what this policy will do. Will it be good for the economy, bad for the economy? What will it do to reduce emissions? So we went to this group called REMI, Regional Economic Modeling, Inc. They are they're just really a policy modeling center. They model tax policy and things. They work for state governments and industry associations. And we gave them our policy and said, what will happen to the economy, what will happen, and so they told us what they expect on emissions, the economy, health, and people's incomes with relation to the dividend check. And so they told us all those results, and we'll take you through each one of those now. So the first thing they said is, okay, well, you're going to reduce emissions pretty dramatically, about 30% after 10 years. This is below 1990 levels, mind you, and about 50% after 20 years. That's pretty dramatic. And but it wasn't all that surprising, in the sense that we said, okay, we know if you put a price on carbon, your emissions are going to go down. That's simple economics, supply and demand, right? Price signals work. Price gets more expensive, emissions drop. So we were really pleased with the results, excited to see how quickly it would go down, but weren't that surprised. The next thing is what surprised me and a lot of us, which is that they said, oh, and you're also going to add about 2 million jobs after 10 years and about 3 million after 20 years. And I said, all right, I'm a client. And the other thing they told us is, oh, and you're going to avoid some premature deaths. Reason being that a lot of the fuel switching that happens when you go from particularly coal to gas, or coal to nuclear, coal to wind or solar, and if you're reducing the amount that people drive, you're putting fewer emissions into the air of other, not just CO2, but also sulfur emissions and those kinds of things. And by reducing that, you're taking emissions out of the air that tend to cause negative health effects, the result of which is that they expect it will avoid about 250,000 premature deaths over about 20 years nationally. So that was just icing on the cake for us, but it's good news. And the final thing, of course, people say, okay, what does my carbon tax, or what does my carbon check look like? So after about 10 years, it'd be almost $300 a month. This is for a family of 4. After 20 years, it'd be almost $400 a month. That's the estimate. Now, it's probably worth pointing out that I mentioned at the top of this talk that there are a lot of others who support this kind of approach. One big difference between our approach and others that support this, some talk about, instead of doing this dividend check approach, doing what we call a tax swap. So you take, corporate and personal income taxes, you lower them, and instead you put a carbon tax on instead. That's another way to do it. It has some benefits and some drawbacks. I don't think you get quite the same results that we are talking about here. But if you hear revenue neutral carbon tax, it could also be referring to that approach as well. Okay, so finally, who are we? This is a little bit the sales pitch part of this, but especially because we'd love to get you all involved locally. So we're international. We're mostly US and Canada, but we're international now. We have chapters all around the world, about 350. I'm excited to say that we have pretty good prospects now for probably 4 chapters here in Alabama after this tour. So far, anyway. Maybe a 5th one here, Birmingham, what do you think? We're strictly nonpartisan, so we believe in working with all members of Congress, all 535, in a nonpartisan way, and trying to build relationships with all of their offices. We're strictly nonprofit, so we have a C3 and a C4, kind of distinguished, for those of you familiar with that, we have Citizens Climate Education, Citizens Climate Lobby, so lobby is kind of what volunteers will, as citizens, work with our members of Congress. We don't have professional lobbyists. We're built to kind of train all of you as citizens to engage your members of Congress. Because at the end of the day, they want to hear from you. So we don't have paid lobbyists. We're solution focused, so this is really important. As an organization, we like to say that we're for things, not against things. So we focus, we're sort of energy agnostic. We don't advocate for or against any type of energy solution. Instead, we say we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Our lead proposal right now is carbon fee and dividend. So that allows us to be for something when we go meet with our members of Congress. And we can kind of craft our conversation around that. So And really that gives us something to talk about. Now, if our members of Congress think that they have a better solution, we say, hey, we're all ears. You know, we're open to other proposals as well. But this is what we believe right now is the most effective first step to really get our hands around this issue. And the only rule that we have as an organization is to approach everybody with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. And this is actually, you know, our founder of the organization who said we want to build this on the Gandhi philosophy of approaching everybody with respect. I had the pleasure, Sandy and I, revisiting the Civil Rights Institute in town today, and I was, you know, I'm not a very emotional guy, but that place chokes me up a little bit. But it was all, you know, I saw the pictures of Gandhi, and it was interesting how they incorporate that. And so I was proud to say that, you know, we're trying to follow a similar model to what was done the Civil Rights Movement in that sense. You know, our vision is a livable world, very simply put. That basically means to, you know, we want to solve climate change. We want to get our hands around this issue because we need to solve it. And our mission is to create the political will for climate solutions by basically empowering our volunteers and citizens in general. You know, I mentioned the debate tonight. It's been a pretty rough election season. I think we would all probably agree to that. It's easy to be cynical, especially during election seasons, and what Congress is right now in kind of a deadlock. So it's really important as an organization, we really focus on really encouraging our members of Congress to work together and to get beyond the partisanship and really focus on solutions. And we believe that that change starts with us, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, so to speak. So we believe in first challenging ourselves to see beyond those perceptions and then asking our members of Congress to do the same thing. And, you know, we really empower ourselves to do all kinds of crazy things. I mean, some of our volunteers have never written a letter to the editor before. This is the first time, you know, they do it with CCL. Never given a presentation before, never stuffed themselves into a car for 22 days and driven around the South before, you know. CCL volunteers find themselves doing all kinds of crazy things as we try to get more and more out there and meet with more folks. Whether they agree with us or not, that's fine. We want to talk to everybody. So how do we build political will? I keep forgetting to change it. This picture is from a stock presentation, so yes, that is me, but this is like a photo that won't go away. So we meet with Congress, right? I've talked a lot about that. We had over 1,200 meetings with Congress last year as citizens, trying to get constituents to work with their members of Congress. And it's really important that they're hearing from us. You know, we often ask them, what are you hearing from your constituents about? And, you know, what do we often hear? Veterans issues, guns, Obamacare, right, all those hot button issues. And so their response is, so what do you expect us to talk about? We're going to talk about veterans issues and guns and Obamacare. We're going to respond to what our constituency is telling us about. And so we want to make sure to keep climate change on the radar and continue to engage them in this conversation. Part of that as well is not just meeting with Congress, but also making sure that they're getting letters and constituent correspondence. So we also encourage our volunteers and really everybody to write letters to Congress, make phone calls, etc. We generated about 16,000 letters to Congress last year. I was told this year we're up to almost 40,000. We'll give all of you an opportunity before you leave, if you'd like to write to your members of Congress, to do so. We also, of course, you know, the media is really important. Obviously, newspapers are no longer the only game in town. There's a lot of other forms of media too. But newspapers do remain perhaps one of the most the best way for members of Congress to kind of keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the district. So they will have a staff member in their office every day looking at the newspaper, seeing what do the letters to the editors say, what do the op-eds say, what does the front page look like, to try to understand what people in their district are thinking, what they're feeling. And so, you know, it really is important to get these letters to the editor and op-eds and things like that. So that's an area that we focus on a lot. On outreach, you know, we try to do presentations. This would be considered an outreach event. Joyce, I think you got the record now. I think this is our biggest on the floor, so good job to Joyce for So we do public speaking, tabling events, things. Tuscaloosa was pretty good, but I think you guys just edged them out, I have to say. We had about 308 chapters at the end of last year. We're up to about 350 now. And again, the purpose in showing these numbers isn't to show how great we are and that we're growing. It's because we don't really focus on anything that we don't think will not, we only focus on things that will build political will. Our goal is to make sure members of Congress think this is something my constituents care about and want me to act on. And that only happens if we get this ground game going and get stronger and stronger. So I'm going to just follow up or finish up by asking the question, is it working? Right? We've been at this as an organization since I think 2007. I got involved in 2013 as a volunteer. And I think anecdotally, Henry, how long have you been involved?
2.5 years.
2.5 years. How about 1 year and 1 year? Okay. So I guess Chris, you've been around for
2 years.
3 years. Okay, so about as long as me. So those the volunteers who've been around for a while. There's a lot of anecdote out there about how they've seen the political winds in Congress change a bit on this issue. We used to get a lot of questions about the science, or is it real, is it a hoax, and those kinds of questions. And we would try to respectfully answer them as best we could, bring information to our members of Congress, bring in scientists from within their district to educate them on those issues. Really, we try to stay focused on the policy, though, and kind of leapfrog that whole science issue. But anyway, we used to get those questions, and then over time, we've really gotten more and more policy questions now. So now they're asking us, what about China? What about the border adjustment? What about, what does this do to the economy? What does this do to people's incomes? And so we take that to be a good sign, because it now means that people are moving away from the question of, should we do anything about it, to, well, is this the right solution? And that's a really positive step in our mind. But again, that's very anecdotal. We've kind of tracked our meeting reports and things like that to see where Congress, and we've definitely seen a shift. But we still didn't really have any firm evidence of action. But that all changed this year with two very positive and exciting developments, both in the House of Representatives. Actually, there's one in the Senate, too, that I don't talk about here, but it's a little bit similar. So what we were hearing from a lot of Republicans, Republican offices in particular, was, look, you guys are doing the right thing. I know this is an issue. We've got to solve this. I want to do something about it. But politically, I just feel like my hands are tied. I don't feel like I can come out on this, or I'm going to get primaried, and then I'm going to be out of Congress, and that will be of no use to you anyway. So you've got to help me figure out how I can, you've got to work back in my district to get the support for this. And so we were hearing that from enough offices that we started to connect the dots. And we worked with Congressman Chris Gibson in New York, who's, well, he's retiring this year, so I guess he figured he'd go out with a blaze of glory. But so he said, why don't we introduce this resolution? And all this resolution is going to basically say is, climate change is real, people are causing it, and we should do something about it. It's really just a statement. But what it did was it provided a way for a lot of members of Congress, all Republicans, to sort of hold hands and come out of the closet together and say, yep, climate change is an issue and we got to do something about it, because nobody wanted to sort of be the first to stick their neck out on this. So we were able to identify about a dozen Republicans. Since then, we've had about 3 or 4 or more sign on. I think we're up to about 15 now. The most recent was Mark Sanford from South Carolina. The importance of him, he is a Freedom Caucus member, and that's a group that has traditionally been very skeptical on doing anything on climate change. So we're really starting to see, the winds change and see movement on this. It's baby steps, but they're important baby steps, and they're really prerequisite to us getting anywhere on a policy standpoint. So that was the first exciting thing that happened earlier in the year. The next thing that sort of followed that was a bipartisan, what we call the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. This was introduced by 2 gentlemen in South Florida, Congressman Cabello, Republican, Congressman Deutsch, Democrat. They were the first members on the caucus, and we're now up to 10 and 10, so 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans. And it's not a carbon pricing caucus. They're not endorsing our policy solution right now, although they have had Statoil, one of those companies I mentioned before, to come in and talk about carbon pricing. But they've also talked about adaptation issues, and they've talked about other issues related to climate change. But really what it is it is a place for Congress in the House to have hearings on climate change related issues, whether it's, again, adaptation, mitigation policies, whatever it may be. It's really important, a really important step. And we want to continue to grow this caucus. Probably between now and the election. I don't expect it to grow anymore, but after the election, and we'll probably have to do some rebalancing after the election, because we're going to lose a few of these folks. Some are retiring. Hopefully the others will hold on to their seats. We'll see. But basically, the intent is to continue to keep this strictly bipartisan. We're only adding folks Noah's Ark style, so one Republican, one Democrat at a time, and we're going to continue to grow it that way. So, having run through all of that, we always like to close with an action, because if you got a group of this much horsepower in the room, it'd be a shame to waste it, right? So, what we will invite you to do, and Sandy and maybe some of our Georgia volunteers can help with this. We have a stack of these little postcards, and this is it's not required. This is voluntary, of course. It's up to you if you want to do this. But basically, this is your opportunity to write a quick little note to your member of Congress, telling them that you are concerned about climate change. Tell them whatever you want. Be respectful. Make it a respectful message. You can write the same thing 3 times. So you're going to get 3. If you put your hand up, we'll give you 3. 2 will go to your senators, Shelby and Sessions. 1 to your representative. If you don't know who your rep, there's probably multiple around here, right?
Sewell or Palmer.
Yeah, so if you don't know who your rep is, we'll look it up. We'll look up your address. On the back, you put your address and name. What we actually do with these is we hand-deliver them to your members of Congress, so when you go see them again, we're actually going to be back in D.C. in November. So what we'll do is we'll give it to you here. You can fill them out. We've got a pen, too. Just put up your hand if you're interested in saying you can come by and give you 1, or give you 3 actually. And just make sure to give them to us before you leave. We'll collect them and we'll deliver them. One thing I will say that what this says is I'm concerned about climate change because, and it has some space to write some text. And it says, and there it talks about carbon fee and dividend. If you're not sold on that policy yet, that's fine. You can write a letter on loosely, and we'll take that too. We'll take that to them. So we just want to make sure that we're hearing from all of you as constituents. The other thing we've been doing in each city is taking a picture of everybody with a little sign. And I think we can maybe try that. It might be a little tough, but so that's the other thing we like to do before we all leave if you want to participate. There you go. Henry's got the sign.
I want a carbon fee. You can write your own message.
Yeah. So we can either do a big group picture or individual pictures if you all want. The other thing too, if you all can join us in Jackson, I know it's very short notice, but if you all are able to join us Saturday, maybe we'll do a little carpool from Birmingham. The URL is here. It's tinyurl.com/2016-southern-conf, conference. We're going to have a day-long, we're going to have workshops. I'm sorry, question?
And we're going to do that in Georgia, January 28th.
Oh, there you go.
So y'all are invited there as well.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more.
That might even be closer for you here.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, so we're going to have 2 workshops. The one is this Saturday, and then in Jackson, and the URL is here. Well, it'll be on the final screen. We'll leave it up for people to write down the URL. And then there's going to be another one in Georgia.
Yeah, the last Saturday of January, January 28th.
Atlanta?
Yeah, in Atlanta, and we put people up in our houses if you need a place to stay. But, virtually everybody here probably knows somebody already in Atlanta, right?
Peter, can I ask a basic question? How does one ascertain what percentage of carbon dioxide comes from man versus nature?
Good question. So you're right, there are multiple sources. You can actually do the math. It's actually quite simple if you look at the amount of fossil fuels we've unearthed over the past 100 years. And I actually did this one day on a piece of paper because I'm an engineering nerd. You actually come out to pretty close to where we are on the trajectory. Now, of course, some of that's been absorbed by the oceans, like I said. The carbon cycle pretty naturally. You have, some coming out of there's natural seeps. Of course, we all breathe it out, and then plants breathe it in. So you have this natural. You do have volcanoes that do these occasional bursts of CO2. Usually that's absorbed by plants photosynthesis. So the main way is just measure it, really.
I mean, how do you ascertain the impact of man's CO2 versus nature's?
Oh, well, there it's indifferent, right? Just like electrons coming in your house from any power plant, CO2 in the atmosphere from any source is the same.
Except there are some carbon signatures.
Yeah,
you
right.
can get into the wonky part. I'll answer that later.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you can look at the isotopes and you can figure that out, but the impact is basically the same. The actual impact to the environment is the same. So, yes, sir.
In your presentation, I know I've read about 30% of carbon that comes, at least, comes from the cows we grow. I've read that cows are main methane.
Yep.
And does the carbon pricing scheme, does it affect agriculture at all? Is there provision for agriculture?
Yeah, great question. So the answer is yes and no. Insofar as the agricultural industry consumes fossil fuels to do their business, of course, yes, because they're going to be impacted by the feed. We have wrestled with that question because it is a real issue. I think we've ultimately decided that it's not included, not that it's not an issue, it's just it grossly complicates this. So, you know, the way I look at it is kind of the 80-20 solution. If we can take care of 80% of the problem, you know, let's do it with a simple policy. All those other issues, and it's not just, you got agriculture that emits methane, which is a very strong greenhouse gas. You've got methane leaks and fracking and just distributing gas. You know, gas can be a cleaner fuel, but it's inherently leaky. It gets out of, you know, pipes and things like that. So, but that's a much more difficult issue to resolve just because there's so many point sources. So currently we don't specifically address it, but we do think that there's a role for government to address it in other ways. So thank you for that. Yes, ma'am.
You know, around here when we start talking about this, the whole thing comes up about the coal industry. And, you know, we have people that grew up in the coal industry, but they're black ones sometimes. But at the same time, that's been their livelihood.
Yeah.
And there's a real fear of this, and I think that's been part of the denial of, oh, there's no such thing as climate change caused by people. But how do you address that?
Like in best cost, so I'm from oil and gas country, and it's an easier sell there because.
Yeah, it's not an easy sell.
Yeah, I know. It's an easier sell. Well, it's a tough sell in Texas, believe me, but it's easier in the sense that there's likely a future for gas for quite a long time with the carbon fee, and oil will be around for a long time. Coal is going to be tougher to adapt to this because it's a heavier carbon fuel, a more carbon intensive fuel, I should say. You know, there's a couple of ways, I guess, to respond to that. I'm not going to say that this is a silver bullet, but these are just some thoughts, and I'll invite others to share their thoughts too. You know, one is that I've been very impressed, frankly, traveling through Alabama with the diversity of the economy, and the amount of manufacturing that we've seen in agriculture.